Tom Bennett never imagined that his wife Sarah and their neighbor Jason were hiding a secret that would shatter his life. What started as a quiet suburban evening turned into 6 days of shocking betrayal, dark revenge, and secrets no one saw coming. Every move, every decision, every hidden truth would lead to a confrontation that left everyone stunned. Who would survive the ultimate reckoning? Tom Bennett had always considered himself a patient man, one who could handle the pressures of life quietly and calmly. He worked long hours at a mid-sized accounting firm and spent the evenings at home trying to maintain the sense of stability he had built over the years. On the surface, everything about his life seemed ordinary, too ordinary perhaps. His house was pristine, his lawn perfectly trimmed, and his neighbors often complimented him on having a picture-perfect family. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something was quietly stirring, something he could not yet name, and soon it would consume every thought he had. The day had started like any other. Tom left for work at 7:30 a.m., kissed Sarah goodbye, and waved as she smiled and waved back. He trusted her, or at least he thought he did. Over the years he had never seen a reason not to. Sarah was attentive, charming, and seemingly devoted, yet there had been little cracks he had ignored. Late-night phone calls she claimed were from work, unexplained errands, and an occasional secretive look she cast when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Tom had brushed these off, telling himself he was being paranoid. But that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm glow over the suburban streets, he sensed something in the air that felt different, heavier, almost electric. Tom returned home early from work that day, a rare occurrence prompted by an unexpected client meeting that had been cancelled. He parked his car quietly, careful not to alert anyone inside. As he approached the house, he noticed that the front blinds were slightly askew, letting slivers of light escape into the fading evening. A faint murmur reached him from the bedroom. It was indistinct at first, just a soft rhythmic sound, but as he drew closer, his heart began to race. It was unmistakable. Voices, not the ordinary voices of normal conversation, but low, urgent, intimate sounds that froze him in his tracks. With a sense of dread, Tom crept toward the bedroom door. He could see through the crack in the door, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Sarah was there, yes, but not alone. A man unfamiliar to Tom stood in the room with her. The shock hit him like a physical blow. Every detail seemed to sear into his memory, the way the man's hand rested on her waist, the look of careless delight on Sarah's face, and the ease with which she seemed to abandon herself to him. Tom's mind struggled to process the scene. How long had this been happening? How could he have been so blind? Every moment he had spent trusting her suddenly felt like a lie. Time seemed to slow as Tom remained frozen in the doorway. Anger, disbelief, and hurt collided inside him in ways he had never experienced before. He wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to shatter the room with his fury, but something darker and more deliberate took hold. Instead of reacting impulsively, he slipped back into the shadows, heart pounding, eyes never leaving the scene. The man's presence seemed surreal, almost like a nightmare he could not wake from. Tom realized that this moment, brief as it was, would define everything that came next. As the minutes passed, he began to notice other details. Jason, the man in the room, seemed oblivious to the depth of the pain he was causing. Sarah laughed quietly at something he said, unaware that she had been caught. Every glance, every movement of the two of them told a story of betrayal, a story Tom now knew he could not ignore. By the time he finally stepped away, his mind was no longer filled with questions of disbelief but with plans, dark and consuming, that would shape the coming days. That night, Tom lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He could still see the scene in his mind as clearly as if it had been filmed before his eyes. The perfect life he had imagined was gone, replaced by a gnawing obsession with revenge. One thought repeated itself relentlessly. She had crossed a line, and he would make sure that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the discovery, Tom Bennett moved through his house like a man walking in a fog. Everything seemed familiar, yet completely changed. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt intrusive, exposing a reality he could no longer ignore. Sarah moved about the kitchen, humming softly, unaware that the storm she had unleashed the previous evening was already taking shape. Tom watched her, his mind working in ways it never had before. He felt a cold, calculated clarity, replacing the raw shock and hurt he had felt the night before. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about power, control, and a reckoning. He began by observing, quietly and meticulously. Tom retraced every step of Sarah's day, noting her routines, the times she left the house, and the small habits that revealed the depth of her duplicity. Every message she received, every phone call she answered in hushed tones, became a piece of a puzzle he intended to solve. The more he watched, the more he realized how careless she had been, how certain she felt that he would never suspect anything, that carelessness would be her undoing. Tom's mind was a whirl of strategies. He knew that confronting her immediately could provoke chaos, or give her the chance to manipulate the situation in her favor. He needed patience. He needed precision. For the first time in his life, he saw himself not just as a husband wronged, but as a man on a mission, someone willing to walk the razor's edge between sanity and obsession. Each thought of revenge brought a mix of exhilaration and dread, a dangerous cocktail that made it impossible for him to focus on anything else. Meanwhile, Sarah's behavior began to shift, though she did not realize it. She felt the tension in the air, a subtle change in Tom's gaze, but dismissed it as fatigue or stress. She continued her secret meetings with Jason, believing her careful deception was enough to protect her. But Tom had already noticed patterns she thought were invisible. He tracked the routes she took, the times she met Jason, even the messages she sent that she believed were erased. Every small piece of evidence fed his growing plan, each detail sharpening the image of the revenge he was constructing in his mind. Tom's friend Mark, who had always been a steady presence in his life, noticed a change in him as well. Mark tried to reach out, sensing a darkness in Tom that he had never seen before. He urged him to let go of the anger, to seek a calmer path, but Tom only smiled faintly, a chilling and unreadable expression. Mark could not comprehend the depth of the transformation. Tom was no longer simply hurt or betrayed. He was patient, calculating, methodical, and obsessed. He would not allow anyone, Sarah, Jason, or even Mark, to stand in the way of what he was about to accomplish. Each passing hour fueled the tension. Tom began imagining scenarios, testing reactions in his mind, visualizing the eventual confrontation and refining the steps that would lead to it. He considered the smallest details, how he would expose the affair, how he would humiliate them, how he would manipulate their sense of security to his advantage. The plan grew more elaborate, precise and daring with each thought. It became an all-consuming obsession, a shadow that followed him everywhere, whispering possibilities and consequences. By the end of the second day, Tom had solidified a decision. He would not act impulsively or recklessly. This would be deliberate, strategic, and irreversible. He understood that once the first move was made, nothing could be undone. The thought of it both terrified and thrilled him. Late that night, as the neighborhood slept quietly under the dim glow of streetlights, Tom sat in the dark living room, eyes fixed on the faint silhouette of his wife in the other room. He was ready. He had observed, studied, and prepared. The game of revenge had begun, and Sarah and Jason were completely unaware that every step they took was being watched, measured, and anticipated. By the third day, Tom Bennett's patience had hardened into something sharper, almost tangible. The raw shock of betrayal had faded, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. Every time he saw Sarah laughing with Jason, every time he imagined their whispered conversations and secret touches, a quiet fire grew inside him. He knew he could no longer be a passive observer. It was time to take the first step, a small deliberate strike that would signal the beginning of his carefully orchestrated revenge. Tom did not act impulsively. He spent hours that morning studying Jason's patterns, observing the little routines that made him vulnerable. He noted the times Jason left the house, the streets he traveled, the habits he believed were unnoticed. There was no rush. Each detail mattered. The plan had to be precise, subtle enough to sow fear and uncertainty, but visible enough to make its purpose unmistakable. By the afternoon, Tom had selected his target, Jason's car. It was a symbol of independence, of freedom, and of arrogance. Damaging it would shake Jason's confidence, and more importantly, unsettle Sarah. Late that day, Tom moved quietly, almost invisibly, like a shadow slipping through a familiar landscape. He approached Jason's driveway under the cover of an overcast sky, where the clouds seemed to conspire with his purpose. His hands worked with meticulous care, sabotaging the vehicle in ways that would make it fail at the worst possible moment. It was subtle, nearly undetectable, yet irreversible. A single misstep by Jason could lead to chaos, and Tom anticipated every possibility. By the time he finished, he stepped back and observed his work with satisfaction, a calm smile brushing his lips. The trap was set. The next morning, chaos arrived exactly as Tom had envisioned. Jason's car refused to start, leaving him stranded in the middle of a busy street. He tried again and again, but the engine groaned and failed. The frustration in Jason's face was unmistakable, his composure cracking under the pressure of public embarrassment. Passers-by watched curiously, but none suspected the hidden architect of his misfortune. Meanwhile, Sarah's phone rang incessantly, Jason's panic spilling into hurried, desperate messages. She felt the first tremors of unease, the cracks in the illusion she had so carefully built. Tom, observing from the shadows, felt a thrill. The first move had been executed perfectly, and the dominoes had begun to fall. Tom's satisfaction was not only in the immediate disruption. He watched as fear and tension crept into the interactions between Sarah and Jason. They whispered urgently over the phone, hurriedly planning alternatives, each call a testament to the growing instability in their secret world. Tom recorded these moments in his mind, storing them like trophies. He understood that revenge was not a single act, but a series of escalating strikes, each one designed to break the foundations of trust and security. As the day progressed, Tom continued his quiet observation, noting every reaction, every nervous glance, and every slip of composure. Sarah grew restless, pacing the house, her laughter no longer light and careless. Jason's calls became frantic, filled with panic and confusion, and Tom, patient and deliberate, began to imagine the next step, the escalation that would make this first strike seem like only a warning. He realized that fear was a weapon far more powerful than confrontation. By controlling the small moments, he controlled the narrative, and that control was intoxicating. By evening, Tom had transformed his grief and anger into something almost mechanical, a relentless drive to reclaim power. The first move had succeeded beyond expectation, not through brute force or overt confrontation, but through subtle manipulation. He had begun to dismantle the world they had built, exposing weaknesses they never realized existed. In the quiet of his own home, Tom finally allowed himself a long, slow breath, knowing that this was only the beginning. By the fourth day, Tom Bennett's plan had gained momentum, and his patience had turned into a precise, almost surgical obsession. The first strike had been a subtle warning, enough to unsettle Jason and Sarah, but Tom knew the real power lay in controlling their choices, their movements, and their perception of safety. He needed a trap, one they could not escape, one that would expose their secrets and leave them vulnerable. It had to be flawless, clever, and unexpected. He spent the morning planning every detail, mapping out locations, timing, and contingencies, as though he were rehearsing a play in which he alone knew the ending. He chose a warehouse on the outskirts of town, an abandoned building with dim lighting and a maze of narrow corridors. It was isolated, unassuming, and perfect for secrecy. Tom crafted a scenario to lure them in, a fabricated emergency that would appeal to both Sarah and Jason, something urgent and private that required their immediate attention. Every word, every detail he imagined sending them there had to seem believable. He knew that if either hesitated, the illusion would crumble, and the plan would fail. By mid-afternoon, every element was ready. The trap was no longer just an idea, it was a living mechanism, poised to spring at the right moment. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jason continued their secret interactions, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. They felt invincible, as though Tom's earlier actions had been isolated incidents rather than deliberate warnings. Their carelessness played directly into his hands. Tom monitored them from a distance, observing their habits, noting their reactions, cataloging their vulnerabilities. Every laugh they shared, every whispered call, became ammunition for the confrontation he envisioned. The tension inside him grew, a mixture of anticipation and cold satisfaction, as he imagined the moment they would walk straight into his trap. As evening approached, Tom executed the next phase. He sent the fabricated message, carefully disguised, making it appear as though a mutual acquaintance needed urgent help with a personal matter. Sarah and Jason read it, and without hesitation decided to meet at the warehouse. Neither suspected that the entire scenario had been orchestrated with meticulous care, that every step they took was being anticipated. Tom knew the building like the back of his hand, every shadow, every corridor, every potential hiding place. He had prepared himself for any reaction, ready to manipulate the situation with precise control. The drive to the warehouse was filled with tension, though neither of them recognized it. Sarah's excitement and fear blended together, and Jason's confidence masked an underlying nervousness. Tom watched from a distance, heart steady but mind racing. He imagined how the confrontation would unfold, visualizing their surprise, their panic, and the slow realization of their exposure. The trap was not meant to harm physically, it was psychological, designed to break their sense of security, to make them understand that their actions had consequences far beyond what they could imagine. When Sarah and Jason finally entered the building, Tom's anticipation reached its peak. He stayed in the shadows, hidden and silent, every sense focused on them. The faint echo of their footsteps in the empty warehouse seemed deafening, each step reinforcing the control he held over the situation. He watched as they moved further into the corridors, completely unaware of the cameras and sensors he had installed. Every whisper, every glance, every hesitant pause was recorded in his mind, a slow-building tapestry of tension that would culminate in the confrontation he had imagined for days. By the end of the day, Tom had achieved exactly what he had planned. The trap was set, the prey had walked in, and the game had shifted to a new level. The warehouse, dark and silent, became a stage for the unfolding drama, and Tom's control over the situation was absolute. In the quiet shadows, he allowed himself a small, calculated smile. The next day would bring the confrontation, but tonight, the suspense was the weapon, and he wielded it masterfully. Sarah and Jason had no idea what awaited them, and the tension of that unknown hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. The fifth day arrived like a storm on the horizon, silent but inevitable. Tom Bennett had waited for this moment for nearly a week, every second sharpening his focus, every thought building the perfect confrontation. The warehouse, dim and silent, had become a stage for a performance that only he fully understood. Sarah and Jason believed they were entering a place of secrecy, a location that promised discretion and control, but in reality, every step they took had been orchestrated, every movement observed. Tom's patience, meticulous planning, and calculated provocations had led to this moment, and the thrill of impending exposure coursed through him like electricity. As Sarah and Jason walked deeper into the warehouse, Tom's senses were heightened. Every sound, every shadow, every hesitant glance was a thread he could pull to manipulate them. He remained in the darkness, silent, almost invisible, watching as their false confidence began to waver. The first signs were subtle, a tremor in Jason's hands, a brief hesitation in Sarah's stride, a glance toward the corners of the building as if sensing something was wrong. Tom knew he had them exactly where he wanted. The trap was no longer just a physical location, it had become a psychological battlefield, and he was in complete control. Then, without warning, Tom stepped forward from the shadows. His sudden presence startled them both, and the air seemed to thicken with tension. Sarah's face drained of color, and Jason's bravado faltered, replaced by panic. Tom calmly revealed that he had known everything from the beginning. The affair, the secret calls, the hidden meetings. The weight of betrayal hung heavily in the room, suffocating them, but the shock of revelation was only the beginning. Tom's eyes were cold, calculated, showing no anger, only the precise clarity of someone who had prepared every detail for this confrontation. As the initial shock settled, Tom delivered another revelation, one that neither Sarah nor Jason could have anticipated. He revealed that Sarah had not only betrayed him, but she had been manipulating others as well, including Mark, Tom's best friend. The evidence was subtle, pieces of conversations, secret messages, and hidden actions that exposed Sarah's schemes. Jason's panic deepened, not only from fear of Tom's control but from the realization that the web of deception was far wider than he had imagined. The narrative they had believed was unraveling, and there was no escape. Tom's confrontation was precise, surgical even. He exposed Sarah's lies to Jason, forcing them both to confront the consequences of their actions. The power balance shifted entirely. Sarah, who had thought herself clever and untouchable, was now vulnerable, stripped of control. Her confidence shattered. She realized that Tom had not only anticipated her every move but had outmaneuvered her at every turn. Jason's desperation became almost palpable, his sense of security destroyed by the revelation that he had been played from the start. Yet the most shocking twist came when Mark arrived unexpectedly, having followed his instincts to intervene. His arrival revealed further layers of deceit, connecting him to Sarah's manipulations in ways none of them could have foreseen. Tom's plan had not only ensnared Sarah and Jason but had uncovered hidden alliances and betrayals that even he had not anticipated. The confrontation had escalated from a personal reckoning to a complex web of exposure, fear, and consequences. Every lie, every betrayal, every hidden secret had been laid bare under Tom's relentless observation. By the end of the day, the warehouse was filled with a silence heavier than words. Sarah and Jason were humiliated, fearful, and powerless, while Mark stood frozen, realizing the depth of the deception he had been tangled in. Tom, though calm on the surface, felt the final pieces of his plan falling into place. He had achieved the revelation he had meticulously orchestrated, but even as he stood there, a deeper sense of anticipation filled him. The final act of this dark story was still to come, and the consequences of their actions were far from over. The stage was set for the ultimate conclusion, and the suspense hung in the air like a storm about to break. The sixth day began with a tense stillness that seemed to hang over the quiet suburban town like a dark cloud. Tom Bennett knew the final act of his revenge was imminent. For nearly a week he had observed, planned, and executed, each move meticulously calculated to strip Sarah and Jason of their false sense of security. Now, with all the pieces in place, the conclusion would be swift, decisive, and irreversible. The warehouse, once just a trap, had transformed into a chamber of revelation where the truth would crush those who had betrayed him. Sarah and Jason had spent the night in a haze of anxiety. They knew something was coming, but had no idea what form it would take. Every sound outside the warehouse, every creak of a floorboard, made them jump, their nerves fraying with each passing hour. Jason's confidence, once so effortless, had been replaced by a constant undercurrent of fear, while Sarah's bravado had dissolved into anxious pacing and whispered attempts at reassurance. The first strikes had left them rattled, the trap had tightened around them, and now the final confrontation loomed, invisible yet inescapable. Tom entered the warehouse with quiet precision. He moved through the shadows, unseen but fully aware of every glance, every twitch, every attempt at control by Sarah and Jason. His mind replayed every betrayal, every hidden lie, and every moment of humiliation they had caused him. Yet there was no rage in his actions, only the cold logic of a man who had transformed pain into strategy. This was no longer about anger, it was about completion, about exposing the truth in a way that left no room for denial. As he stepped into the dim light, he revealed the extent of the web he had uncovered. Sarah and Jason froze as Tom explained not only the affair, but also the ways in which Sarah had manipulated Mark, Tom's closest friend. He showed evidence he had collected over the past days, messages, videos, and patterns of behavior that left no room for doubt. The shock in Sarah's eyes was mirrored by Jason's pale, tense expression. The control they thought they had wielded over their secret lives had evaporated, leaving them exposed and powerless. The final twist came unexpectedly. Authorities arrived, called anonymously through a carefully orchestrated setup by Tom. Mark, who had attempted to intervene earlier, was implicated in Sarah's manipulations, caught in the tangled web he had failed to see. The revelation shocked everyone, even Tom, who had not anticipated the full extent of the consequences. The betrayal was no longer simple, it had rippled outward, entangling friends and acquaintances in a chain reaction of exposure and accountability. Sarah's arrogance and Jason's confidence dissolved completely as they faced the reality of their actions. Each lie, each secret, each calculated manipulation had been exposed, leaving them humiliated and vulnerable. The warehouse, dark and silent, had become a stage for complete reckoning, a place where deception and betrayal were laid bare. Tom stood at the center, calm yet intensely focused, a man who had turned heartbreak into strategy, observation into control, and betrayal into revelation. As the authorities led Sarah, Jason, and even Mark away, the weight of the week's events settled on Tom. He had achieved his revenge with precision, yet the victory felt hollow, shadowed by the knowledge of what obsession could create. The quiet suburban streets he had once walked with ease now seemed unfamiliar, tainted by the events that had unfolded. His life had been reshaped by betrayal, revenge, and exposure, and the scars of that transformation would linger far longer than anyone could imagine. By nightfall, the warehouse stood empty, a silent witness to a week of manipulation, deception, and retribution. Tom walked away with the knowledge that he had restored a sense of justice, but at a personal cost that could not be measured. The story of betrayal, calculated revenge, and shocking twists had reached its conclusion, leaving a suburban town forever changed and a man transformed by the darkness he had harnessed with chilling precision.